Welcome to Building AI Visibility through Third-Party Citations. I'm Lindsay Hagan, VP of Marketing here at Conductor. An AI search doesn't just crawl your website, it decides which sources are trusted enough to cite, whether it's on your own website or another website. And so that means your brand's visibility is being shaped both on your on-site and off-site. So in this session, we are going to jump into what that means for enterprise teams, what brands are doing to win in AI, and how Conductor and Noble work together to help you go from spotting gaps to taking action. And today I'm super excited because I'm joined with two of our partners from Noble, Rahul Jain, the CEO and co-founder, and Josh Budman, the CTO and co-founder. Hey guys.
Hey, thanks, Lindsay.
Welcome to Summit. We're really excited to dive in. I'm just going to get started. I don't think we need to go through anything else. Let's just get right into it. Josh, why don't we jump in with you? So AI engines obviously don't just index your content. They decide whether to trust it enough to cite it. So what does it actually mean to build credibility with AI? And how is that different from what we used to think of as authority?
Yeah, so the most important thing to remember, and there's obviously, we'll hear that there's a lot of overlap from experts in the field between traditional SEO pre-LLM and post-LLM search. I think the big difference is that large language models are, by definition, they're deep machine learning models. And to make it very simple, deep machine learning models are probabilistic. And so I come at this from a technical perspective, and so my answer is going to be technically heavy. But when you start to think about things that are probabilistic, you think of a distribution, and the simplest way for me to tell you what a distribution is just the normal distribution, like a bell curve. So, if you were to give an exam, and I promise I am getting to how this relates to content and trust. If you're giving an exam, there's going to be a big group of students in the middle, just because that's how the distribution works on a bell curve. That when an LLM looks to answer a question, the way LLMs define trust mathematically is by finding what is in that middle distribution for to provide the best answer to the question. And so the goal really to build trust is to actually be, on-site content is super helpful. That LLMs are going to care a lot about what the brand says on site, but there's tons and tons of other sites out there. The stat we see is 85 to 95% of the LLM's answers are driven by sites that are not the brand's core site. That's what's actually building that center of the distribution. So the goal is really to have very consistent, but not the same messaging across all of those different sites to tell the LLM that, yes, this is the center of that probability distribution, and this is probably where we should look in terms of providing a trustworthy answer. And so it all comes back to that bell curve.
I love that analogy. It's like it's a really easy way to think about your content and how to build authority in kind of this new AI era. So Rahul, just jumping over to you for a sec. So third-party sources are shaping, as Josh mentioned, how AI is describing your brand. So what's at stake for companies that sit it out, are not as say proactive right now as they need to be? Just tell us a little bit about, we'll do some future telling right now. Tell us about the next 12 to 18 months and what would happen and what will happen if brands don't start acting to build their AI authority now.
Yeah, I think there's a huge first mover advantage where we're seeing smaller brands, startups have higher visibility than the typical incumbents in their space. And that's just because they're being much more proactive and aggressive about not only like optimizing their own website for LLMs, but also trying to get mentioned on these third-party sites that the LLMs are citing. So, any company could wait 12 to 18 months, but the bar and the amount of work that would be necessary and the investment at that point is going to be significantly more had they just kind of been more proactive and tried to get ahead of some of their other peers in this space in terms of just trying to getting mentioned on these other third-party sites that the LLMs are clearly pulling from. And that's what's exciting about this moment in time is that if you are a company, whether you're a startup or an incumbent, if you do move fast and you get your brand kind of mentioned in the sources that the LLMs are pulling from, you could have an advantage, not just for the next 6 to 12 months, but it could be an advantage that could make it really hard for anybody else to kind of surpass you in the future.
That's a really good insight. I think there's creates a lot of like urgency for brands. Now, what happens as search continues to change? And Josh or Rahul, this could be for either of you. And maybe agents are the ones that are actually going out and actually finding answers, and it's not just human searchers anymore.
I think the way that agents consume content is just definitionally going to be a bit different. And so, and and I actually think that I think that we're going to start to have, right now I think the general thought is that website traffic, and not thought, it's actually pretty well defended by stats. Website traffic generally is going down across the board because LLMs are serving information. I think at a certain point, there's going to be another layer of abstraction with, like you're asking, Lindsay, agents serving that information. So I think, and then I think the way that agents further aggregate that information to their human companion, per se, is going to be based on what the human actually likes. So it's going to be even more tailored. So I actually think what's going to be super interesting is figuring out, how maybe the way that agents are consuming information is the same as humans are now, but what type of aggregation, like what type of synthesis will those agents do before presenting it to humans? So it's almost like there's a different transformation layer. I think that's where it's going to get really interesting, because at the end of the day, as long as we want humans to exist, there is going to be some form of information transferred to our eyes. And I think that what'll be really interesting is figuring out, sure, maybe the agents are consuming information from LLMs like today, but maybe the second layer of optimization is how do we make it so that what the agents consume and what is actually provided to us humans is what we want as brands to show up. So that's the way I look at it. It's effectively one transformation from the website to the LLM, and then another one from the LLM to the human almost.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I think potentially the volume of searches could increase, because if you're a human, you're time sensitive. There's only so much that you can search, and it takes time to essentially understand what you're reading. If an agent is searching, they could probably do like an order of magnitude more searches. So it's probably even more important that you as a brand are showing up in that answer that the agent is pulling from. I think that's one part of it. I think the other part is that today ads are a big part of search. But what happens when you tell your agent to ignore anything that's sponsored or paid as an ad that's showing up in the answer? And so does that mean that getting into the actual like organic results or just the answers that the LLMs are providing are even that much more important than relying on ads to get in front of the human? So it'll be interesting to see kind of what that UI is and what the agents are actually able to pull from, if it's like the full screen or if they're ignoring parts of it based off the instructions they're getting.
Awesome. Yeah, so it sounds like the prediction is that organic will continue to grow in terms of importance, and ads, while there may be obviously a place for them in sort of the modern LLM ecosystem, there may be they may not be as effective as sort of the traditional PPC ads. Is that sort of a fair assessment of the thesis?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a fair assessment. And I think, and we'll kind of get into this, like I do think that organic will become more of a performance channel, especially as you're able to like potentially for B2B, like book demos directly from an LLM, or if it's a consumer product, you could check out directly from the LLM as well. Because right now it's like the attribution is pretty poor at the moment. But if there's a way that you can actually see how often you show up in the answer, and then there's an agent there that can either book a demo for you or actually check out or purchase that product for you, then you're going to have very clear attribution, which is one of the benefits of the ad click, to kind of measure what that click-through rate would be and then the conversion rate. So part of kind of the way we think about the way that this space is going to evolve is that as more actions and like transactions happen from the LLM, I think it's going to get closer and closer to a performance experience.
Awesome. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, I want to get into actually building your AI visibility strategy. Obviously, y'all work at Noble with some of the biggest enterprises. You help them build their third-party citations. So let's say if for someone maybe in the audience that hasn't really started that sort of process or that practice yet, if you were building an AI visibility strategy today, what would that look like? Can you tell us how owned and kind of own content and then also third party content work together?
Yeah, I can take this one, at least start with the answer. I think first off, it's important to say that SEO, traditional SEO tactics or techniques are probably going to be a large part of the battle there. I've heard quotes that, up to 80% of AI visibility is tied to SEO. I think there's a big distinction between traditional SEO techniques with offsite versus what actually works for LLMs that I'll get into. But if you just look at a pie chart, a big part of the pie is going to be very much a lot of the things that you're doing for SEO, especially around content. I mean, it's not, it's clear that having good content and published everywhere and in relevant places is gonna help with your strategy. I think the most important distinction off the bat is that SEO is heavily tied to keywords, and optimizing for LLMs or search in LLMs is very different. There's the way that folks ask, that your prospects or your potential site visitors are asking questions, is very different than just putting keywords into Google. And so knowing how that works is a huge part of the difference. And I think that kind of dovetails into everything else. And I think that's also why, and this comes up a lot, why optimizing for LLMs is a lot more multidisciplinary than optimizing for traditional search environments and for traditional SERPs, because I think it's really important to bring in the content team. Not just, it's the SEO is obviously probably going to be orchestrating this, especially at larger orgs, but the content team will need to be part of the conversation. Even product marketing might need to be part of the conversation, because, and I always say this when it comes to prompts, and this is my thought process, maybe others disagree, but I think there's really two ways to think about the prompts your users might search. One is the type of area they're searching in, so that might be more traditional keyword oriented, and then the other one is persona oriented. And I think those two create the biggest canonical differences in prompts. So you can effectively create variations in prompts the most efficiently by starting with the type of use case you're solving for and the persona. And I think that will kind of orchestrate everything. From there, I think that obviously on-site content is going to be massive. I think especially for bottom of funnel prompts, and bottom of funnel is obviously going to be where your prospects get after they know a bit more about the space. But for bottom of funnel prompts, there's no doubt that on-site content is king. I think as we move towards the middle and top of funnel, that's where offsite plays a much larger role. I think on-site can still contribute, but there is, of course, that gamey strategy that has been proven as potentially very that can be potentially punished to publish on-site self-serving listicles. And I think that's where things get a little dangerous. So pumping out a bunch of AI generated listicles on site is definitely not where you want to go. I think Google is starting to punish that in traditional SERPs. And I think LLMs are starting to become more savvy in terms of aggregating their answers and determining that an on-site self-promotional listicle might actually be heavily biased. So I think having a full multidisciplinary approach on site is key there, and that will definitely serve bottom and middle of funnel. I think as you get to the middle and top of funnel, offsite is the biggest part of the pie. And I think, again, once you've determined what prompts you want to actually serve and based on personas and use cases, that will actually produce the largest variation in sources. And then it's all about getting mentioned in context, not seeming super spammy or like even like sponsored content. It's almost like digital PR at scale, or backlinking. It was the old generation of it. And I kind of alluded to this earlier in my answer. We need way more than the backlinks now. We actually need a contextual mention of the brand, because that's actually, again, going back to the distribution, it's a contextual mention of the brand that gets into the distribution. A backlink doesn't serve any purposes, especially if it doesn't mention the brand. It's all, LLMs are all about being part of the answer, and just a backlink doesn't do it. So I think the combination is really the pie chart, the funnel is really determine your prompts, bottom and middle of funnel, on-site optimization, middle and top of funnel, off-site optimization.
I love that framework, Josh. And I think the prompt generation is so important. It's something at Conductor we obviously spend a lot of time thinking about and building into our product, is like really, really advanced synthetic prompt generation by exactly what you said, Josh, persona. And then we also intent stage as well, because that's really the basis for your strategy. And then obviously in Conductor, we surface where you have gaps across both intent stage and persona stage. So you can decide, okay, this would be a really good opportunity for on-site content, because I love the framework, Josh. This is more bottom of the funnel, later intent stage. But for some of the maybe the earlier stuff, hey, this is a great opportunity to bring in maybe my PR team, maybe the social team, maybe we need some more YouTube content. It's a really, I think that's a really clean way to think about it. Awesome. So, Rahul, I want to shift gears back to you for a minute to bring it back to kind of the main topic of Summit, as AI agents start making decisions, taking actions on behalf of buyers, not just sort of being sort of the traditional chatbot as we've sort of been thinking about it. What happens to brands that aren't showing up in the sources?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. If you're not showing up in the sources, you're not going to show up in the answers that that agent is pulling from. And so it all comes back down to the fact that, like, if you as a user are building an agent and you're having the agent search, Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, that's the information it's going to get access to. And if you're not pulling, or if you're not showing up with the answer, then you're not going to be part of that consideration set that agent will be reviewing and then making recommendations back to kind of whoever the end user is. And the way that we look at the sources is that the best way to predict if you're going to, if your brand is going to show up with the answer is to be mentioned in the sources that the LLMs are citing as part of each of the answers that they're providing. So, certainly having a strategy that allows you as a brand to get mentioned in the sources for the prompts that you're trying to show up for, I think that's critical. So whether it's a human searching, or in the future, if you have agents doing the searching or doing the researching of the work on your behalf, showing up in the answer is critical. And the best way to do that is, ensuring that your brand is mentioned in the sources themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but what does sort of the modern AEO team look like? Is it just still just sitting in the SEO team? Does it have to have your PR? Do you need to engage your PR team? How do you see that? And who are the folks that you see in the Noble platform?
Yeah, it definitely is across multiple teams. So in terms of who our typical stakeholders are, they're using Noble on a regular basis. There's certainly the SEO leader, that's part of it. There's the content team. Sometimes we'll see the PR team or the comms team in there as well. And then there'll be the head of marketing as well that will be involved. So it really is cross-disciplinary. Sometimes there's an affiliate team that will be participating. So it's everybody from who's optimizing the brand's own website from their digital experience, to the team that's in charge of the current outreach to publishers. So it's really kind of cool to see all these teams across marketing come together to really ensure that that brand is showing up in AI search.
Absolutely. And then, Roland and Josh, as we wrap up here, is there anything that you think brands should be thinking about that we didn't talk about as it comes to best practices around building some offsite strategies?
One thing I would say right now is it's always good to kind of just being forward looking as where is the industry going. I think right now people are really caught up around attribution and being able to measure, well, how much traffic is coming to my site from these LLMs. And one thing I would just recommend is don't let that data, because I think it is significantly underreported as far as the value of these LLMs and the users seeing an answer, then opening up a separate tab and then searching or going directly to the website. That isn't great today, but it will get better. And so the one recommendation I give is as brands are testing and investing in AI search, don't get too hung up on measuring traffic. You looking at self-reported attribution in terms of asking customers when they're booking a demo, how did you hear about us? But I do think eventually there will be agents that are booking demos or purchasing that can make that purchase on their behalf, and that attribution will get better over time. But I think just where we are today, given just how early we are in AI search, we're probably in year 2 of the next 25 years. Is don't get lost in some of the traffic and some of the reporting, because that will get better over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you see, within our platform, we let folks measure things like visibility and mentions competitive market share, and those are sort of the leading metrics that you should be looking at. I think to your point, Rahul, getting too caught up on the attribution right now when it is different than kind of the traditional Google blue click model can definitely get folks sort of off on a little bit of maybe stop folks and stop progress because they don't think they're seeing the attribution. But in reality, it may be resulting in things like more direct traffic. It's more brand awareness. It's lower funnel conversions are better because they saw you earlier. So it's really tricky for folks right now to live in sort of this ambiguous area. But there are obviously part of our partnership is when you're doing the offsite work, then you can come back in Noble, you can come back to Conductor and see the impact of that work through citations and visibility.
And then the other thing I was just going to add actually is it's not, I think it's easy to get, and it's a good metric is mentioned, right? How often are you in the answers? But I think the other part of it is, are the LLMs actually talking about you correctly? And that's something that isn't being measured, I think, at all today. I think it's actually really hard to measure because you would actually need to, as a tool measuring visibility, of course, and Conductors in this category. Maybe you guys will be the first, but you'd actually have to know exactly what the brand says about themselves and how close the LLM's answer is to representing the brand. I think there's some good metrics around sentiment score, but information accuracy is really tough. So I think part of your strategy in general, obviously we're biased towards offsite, and the onsite plays a big role here too, but it's way harder to keep offsite content current, is making sure that offsite content is accurate, because ultimately the LLMs are getting information from your site and other sites, and if it's inaccurate, you would think it's probably from the third-party site. So I think that's the other part of things that are very hard to measure, but LLMs kind of change the game because they're probabilistically aggregating answers, not just ranking your site first and going down a list.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, I think we're up on time. It was so great having this conversation, Josh and Rahul. I'm a Noble customer, so very excited, obviously, to have you guys on here today. If folks want to learn more about Noble, where should they go?
You can go to our website at thatsnoble.com, or as part of this partnership with Conductor, you can find out about Noble right within the Conductor platform.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Have a good one. Enjoy the rest of Summit.